Ja. Trenger du kaffe også? Trenger du kaffe også? Ja, det er fortsatt litt tid. Det er 2-3 minutter. Ja, tusen takk! Det er masse sjanser for å glemme i dag. Takk for å komme. Thank you for coming. I think it's on. I think it's recording. No, it's recording. So we have 5 minutes more. Okay. This clock is correct, right? You said comparing to the phone. Yeah, I think it's correct. Yeah. Okay, so 2 more minutes around that. Huh?
Yeah, 4 minutes. So I think it's 1 minute.
It's 1 minute. So a bit too early. Yeah. So when it's about to finish, I guess I have one more minute still to wrap it up.
Is your family?
Yes, they are listening. They're having a party in Vietnam and they're very happy. They're not. They're happy that they can follow, but they say that it's good they did not come because then we have to order everything and organize and then it might be a distraction. So they said it's good that I got focused. Yeah. Sorry? Yes, when I first started the position, I remember the same weather also. And even with some slush. Yes. So when it's time, let me know. Right, 1 more minute based on the clock. Oh, you introduce. Oh, okay. So I don't start. Yeah.
Some formality.
Yeah. I guess that. No, because the recording says 56 more minutes, and the lecture only 45. So.
No, it's fine. It'll go on longer than the.
Yeah.
But we just wait until 1:15, so everybody who wants to come can come.
Yeah. It's mountains.
Yeah,
But it's too dark, so.
Is that AI?
No, it's just a template online. It's not AI. It's just all available on Microsoft.
sharp is 10:15. So should I start?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning. I wish to welcome you all to the PhD defense of Master in Energy, Environment and Society, Minh Nhat Pham. Before we begin, I would like to inform you that both the trial lecture and the defense will be recorded and streamed to reach a larger audience. My name is Pham, Associate Professor at the Norwegian College of Fisheries Science and the leader of the Evaluation Committee. The opponents of today's defense are Professor Martin Quas, Department of Economics, Leipzig University, Germany. Associate Professor Anna Boge Johannessen, Norwegian University of Science and Technology, Norway. In the first part of the defense, Pham will present his trial lecture on a given topic. The title was given to him by the Evaluation Committee 10 working days ago. After the lecture, the committee will meet shortly to evaluate if the lecture is approved. Then we meet again for the presentation of Pham's PhD thesis at 12:15. But first, it is my pleasure to give the floor to Pham for his presentation of the trial lecture. The title is Economic Policy Instrument for Sustainable Use and Conservation of Ecosystem Service. The floor is yours. Please.
Thank you, Thuy. So hi everyone. My name is Minh Nhat Pham, but you can call me Victor. And I have been given the topic for the trial lecture today. It is titled Economic Policy Instruments for Sustainable Use and Conservation of Ecosystem Services. Personally, I found it very interesting, and it enriched me a lot through these 10 days of working and to prepare for this trial lecture. And so first I want to show you in very briefly how do I interpret and understand the title. So first, I will talk briefly about ecosystem services, the definition and categorization based on the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. Then I will tell more why that we need to have sustainable use and conservation of these ecosystem services. And in last, I will talk more about the economic policy instruments that link to the sustainable use and conservation of ecosystem services. And in the end, I will give a case study also. So here is the contents, the table of contents of the presentation. First, I will go through ecosystem services, or abbreviation is ES, and its categorization. Next, I will go through sustainable use and conservation of ES. I will go through some economic theorems that is linked with the sustainable use and conservation of ES. Then I will go through some economic policy instruments, and the last one is the case study and conclusion. So what are ecosystem services? So an ecosystem is a dynamic complex of plant, animal, and microorganism, communities, and the non-living environment interacting as a functional unit. Humans, also we, are also an integral part of the ecosystem, and this was based on the definition by the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, or MEA, in 2005. So that is an ecosystem. Then the services that the ecosystem provided is coined as ecosystem services, and these concepts are understood as the benefits that people obtain from the ecosystems. So it's very broad. Then the Millennium Ecosystem Assessments, they gave out the categorization of 4 types of ES. So the first one is provisioning, the second one is regulating, the third one is control, and the fourth one is supporting. So in overall, there are 4 groups. 3 groups are direct, and 1 group is indirect, based on the MEA. And the examples of provisioning ecosystem services, for example, food or water or raw materials like timber or minerals that human mine and use them. The regulating ecosystem services, for example, climate regulation and pollination, that needs for the agriculture and also our daily life. About cultural ecosystem services, there will be like spiritual services from nature or recreational services from nature. And the last one is the supporting, which means it is an indirect and it goes through the three other direct groups that human benefit from. So for example, nutrient cycling and habitat provision. There are also further subcategories, and they are further defined by CISES in 2018. But today, because of time limit, I will not go through the subcategories of these that defined by CISES. Then the next question is, then why do we need to use sustainably and to conserve the ecosystem services? So some main reasons are that because of heavy exploitation that was in the past and may still have been going on in some places. For example, deforestation in tropical rainforests, that people cutting down too many trees, or also because of economic development, or also of overfishing in marine ecosystems, where you have so many fishermen that go out and fish on the same lake or on the same sea, but without control. For example, also overgrazing in pastoral lands, or overhunting of keystone species. This also will cause a decrease of ecosystem services provided by nature, and also one of the main pool from heavy exploitation is from economic development. There are also reasons, for example, climate change and pollution, that's also linked together in a very dynamic way, that also cause more cascade of decrease of these ecosystem services. So thus that nature as the ecosystem services providers, we need to see them as resources, and thus that these resources need to be conserved and used sustainably, or else it could just be depleted through time. Before going through the instruments, I want to go a bit about of some theorems, some economic theories that linked to how the resources can be depleted and can be overexploited. Today I will go only through three because of time constraint. And the first one is about the Pigou theorem, which were mentioned by Arthur Cecil Pigou in 1920 in his book of The Economics of Welfare. And in this book, he has defined what are market efficiencies and inefficiencies. And the market is only function efficiently when all costs and benefits of production and consumption are fully reflected in the market prices. So thus, if these costs are not fully reflected in the market prices, then the market will function inefficiently. And thus market failures will happen when the allocation of resources is not socially optimal. He also mentioned about the concept of negative externalities. And what does it mean? It means that it is an external cost that makes the social cost of production more than private cost. But then these external costs are not included or are not taken into account. So thus that these external factors are ignored, and then the market fails to allocate resources optimally. So thus it leads to that, because that the cost to produce for the firms are so low, because it's not fully the social cost of production, that this can lead to overproduction because producers do not bear the full cost of the harm that they cause. So to prevent negative externalities, a type of tax, or usually called a Pigovian tax, should be levied, and this tax should be equal to the marginal external cost, and this tax should be applied. So this tax will internalize the externality by forcing the producer to account for the marginal external cost, and thus that with this tax that the private marginal cost will equal the social marginal cost. And now I want to illustrate or demonstrate briefly how this tax work. So we have a two-dimensional graph. On the x-axis is the quantity, and the y-axis is the price. So we have the red line. It is the marginal benefit of the firm, and then the green line is the marginal private cost of the firm. And the equilibrium is the intersection of these two lines, and this defines the specific quantity of the products that the firm needs to produce, and also at a specific price that the firm will sell at. Then, because that the marginal private cost, because of market inefficiencies and the negative externalities were not incorporated, so then if we want to internalize these external factors, then we need another cost function. then we will have the S2 function cost. So this will equal to the marginal private cost plus the external cost, and thus the cost function will shift to the left, and then the new intersect between the marginal benefit and the S2 function cost, it will be the new equilibrium. So thus that when we want to internalize these negative externalities, the firm is forced to produce lower. So that is go from Q to Q star, and it will also increase the price from P to P star. And this gap it is the externality and is equal to the Pigovian tax. There's also some problems with Pigot's theorem. For example, that the marginal social cost needs to be clearly measured, and in many cases, it takes a lot of effort and money to measure them. It was assumed that the social planner knows really clear what are the marginal social costs, but in practice, information is not perfect, and thus there uncertainty exists. Additionally, many negative externalities are not considered as marginal because, for example, like climate change or biodiversity loss, so they are really big, or the negative impacts from production that is not really marginal. And in the end, taxation can sometimes cause all the inefficiencies, for example, with the carbon tax. So if we don't have carbon tax in every country on Earth, and then only some countries put the carbon tax first, then the firms will try to move from the countries having carbon tax to the countries that do not have carbon tax, and it is called carbon leakage. So there will be carbon leakage from other countries in this case, which do not have carbon tax. The second theorem I want to mention is the Coase theorem, and this was written by Ronald Coase in 1960 in his thesis of the problem of social cost. So he also looks at the negative externality or the social cost, but then in a bit of different perspective. So what he said is that given perfect property rights are defined, which means that there is no transaction cost, so then the parties that are affected by the externality can bargain among themselves to reach an efficient outcome without government intervention. So with the previous theorem, it was more about that the government, the social planner, is the government that will try to put a tax on the firms. But in this theorem is that without government intervention and given the zero transaction cost, that the parties can still bargain among themselves. And of course, that given in an idealized world, private negotiation can internalize externalities without the need for taxes or subsidies. But there's also that, because there's also a lot of assumption, and might be that it's only in the perfect world with perfect property rights, that in many cases that it can lead to another issues of the anti-commons. So briefly is that with the anti-commons, for example, that there is a common resources that is governed by a lot of stakeholders, but because of different laws and regulations, that the stakeholders fail to allocate or to exploit the resources optimally. So this is a problem of anti-commons. And so if we don't have defined property rights, then the parties, based on this theorem, the parties do not have legally claim to resources, and thus it will lead to the tragedy of the commons, which is also the third theorem, the third theory I want to mention today. So the tragedy of the commons were written by Gareth Hardin in 1968, and is briefly stating that when the ownership of the resource is ambiguous, then individuals tend to overexploit it and ultimately depleting the shared resource. So this linked directly to overfishing or overgrazing on the pasture lands that I mentioned the case before. So then, those are some theories. Then we know that, yes, we need to conserve and use ecosystem services sustainably. But then how? Then how do we do that? That we need some policy instruments. And there can be different categorization of what other instruments it can be. And usually people can think of three, here I want to present three types of categorization for the policy instruments. So first are the market-based instruments that I will go more deeper because they are linked to economic policy instruments, but there also are a group of instruments, for example, regulatory instruments, which are usually called as non-market-based instruments, for example, quotas or technological standards, that the firms have to follow the fixed quotas to follow a specific technological standards to improve their production for example. And the third group is voluntary and informational instruments. So this group is, for example, we have eco-labeling or public awareness that the government will try to foster to put on the eco-labeling on the products that then will help the firm to incentivize. But today I will mainly talk about market-based instruments, and the three instruments I want to present is Pigovian tax, subsidy and financial incentive, and tradable permits. So we go through the first instrument. It is the Pigovian tax. So this tax is levies a tax equal to the external cost on the activities causing the environmental harm, which were briefly talked before, and also I was demonstrate through the graph. So there are some advantages of this instrument. For example, that it will generate some revenue for the government. So the government have earns more, receives more tax, and it also provides a steady price signal to discourage harmful behavior of the firm. But some of the disadvantages, for example, this tax can be difficult to set the correct tax rate because, as before, negative externalities are usually can be very hard to measure. To put a correct tax on, there can be difficulties and can also cause all the inefficiencies, as was mentioned by the carbon tax example. The second example is the subsidies and financial incentives. So a bit opposite with the Pigovian tax, here that the government will offer financial support to promote sustainable practices. And this type of instrument will make the eco-friendly options more competitive. That firms can adapt more and move from the old, for example, the old production strategy to the new and more eco-friendly production strategy. And this also encourages adoption of cleaner technologies. But there are also some disadvantages of this second instrument, is that it can be costly for government because government is usually the person to pay out to incentivize this sustainable transition in the firms. And it can also create some potential for market distortions, and it can be complex eligibility and targeting criteria to know how much is enough to pay to create enough incentives, which does not create too much favor for one industry, for example. And the last instrument I want to mention are tradable permits. And this instrument that the government will set a cap on total emissions or resource use and allocate tradable permits to firms. So then firms will have the permits, and the permits will say how much the resource that the firm can exploit, and these are tradable. So that those who do not exploit or those who do not mine or exploit or use enough resource in the permits, they can sell to those that need more. So this will provide flexibility through trading between firms, and so still controls the total emissions because the total cap on total emissions are controlled already. There's a bit disadvantage of these tradable permits. For example, it will require robust monitoring for the government to see whether firms really follow the permits, or there will be, for example, still overfishing that's going on, and also to enforce firms to follow these permits and the market oversight from the government. Then about the case study. So I have been thinking that when I received this title, at first I think usually that fisheries has a lot of examples of policy economic instruments. But of course I didn't work in fisheries, and it would be like dark water. So I was thinking maybe I can look at the Norwegian reindeer husbandry management and see how other policies have been given throughout the times, and what other policies have been impact on the results of the impacts of these policies on the husbandry. And for those who have not known about the reindeer husbandry, if you come to Tromsø and you see the emblem of this municipality is a reindeer on it. So reindeer husbandry has been a central part of the identity of the Sami people, and especially the Sami people in the northern Norway. And in the traditional time, it was followed by the traditional nomadic herding industry. But from 1970s, that the government start to manage the husbandry. So I split from I will talk about the case study of the management of the government in the Norwegian reindeer husbandry, and today I want to split them into three eras or three time periods. The first one is from 70s to 90s, 1990s, which I call the modernization, rationalization, or optimization as the wording that was used by the government at that time. The second era or the second time zone will be from 1990s to the 2010. That will be intensification due to some results from the policies, and also some environmental constraints start to happen due to climate change, but I will also mention later. And the last era is from 2010 until now, that there will be more regulation and more support from the government under climate change for the husbandry. So here is nearly enough the Norway map. I want to zoom in those with colors. So here are 6 colors, and actually they are the 6 herding regions of Norway. So we have East Finnmark, West Finnmark, and then Troms purple. So we are in Troms, the herding regions. We have Nordland, North Trøndelag, and South Trøndelag. And this map is based on Nibio map, so it is available online. And just to say a bit more, that reindeers overall, not all of the herding district, but overall they migrate in the summer from the summer pastures to the winter pastures. And overall, generally, they migrate to the east coast. They migrate to the coast in the summer for the summer pastures, and they migrate to the inland for the winter pastures. So, but generally, not all the herding districts follow the same patterns. And also that this is important feature of the husbandry that links to policies later. That in reindeer husbandry, it is very important to know about the herd structure. How many ox or bull are the are the male reindeers, and with the pink icon are the similar, or like it is called the female reindeers in English. And so usually in the herd structure, that there are only few male reindeers, and there are many female reindeers because they are important for bearing calves. And for calf, there are also many as well because they are the main slaughter source. And the government defined calf as the young reindeer that was from birth month until March of the next year. And one notice is that slaughter happens mainly in autumn. This we also need to remember a bit when we go through the policies. So first, I want to go through the ecosystem services provided by the reindeer husbandry. So the husbandry has two main categories from ES. They provide provisioning services, for example, meat, skin and fur, or bones and antlers that are used. And then the husbandry provides a very important cultural services. For example, the Sami identity, the social status of the herders. The bigger the herd, the higher the social status that the herders has in the community. It is also other services. For example, the cultural heritage of Norway, and also for tourism and recreation for both the herders and also for the region. And also, when we look at the husbandry, we cannot ignore the tundra biome or the grazing pasture that the reindeer graze on, because it is a very important part. It is a feed source of the reindeer. And here I list out four ES categories that the tundra biome produce, but I will only today focus on the supporting ES of the tundra biome, because it is really, really linked to the reindeer husbandry. So through the reindeer husbandry, the tundra biome provides supporting ES to humans through the grazing pasture for the reindeer husbandry, through biodiversity maintenance and nutrient cycling. So now we'll go to the first time zone from 1970s to 1990s. So first, before 1978, it was traditional nomadic herding patterns. And then from 1978, the Norwegian government, or actually from 1973 and 76, and the government start to create committees and want to manage the husbandry. And the purpose of this governmental regulation are to increase the profitability of the husbandry, to control the reindeer population sustainably, and to decrease pressure on the grazing pasture. Because the main argument of the government at that time is that there was so many reindeer, the population was so high, and the grazing pasture had a lot of pressure because of that. But then at that time also that there were other herders arguing argument that against this thinking of the government, because they say that biodiversity loss or pressure on the grazing pasture, also landscape changes were due to competing land use from economic development, actually not from reindeer numbers. And this still until now was still a controversial topic. So, but then from 1978, then the government wrote the Randlistloven, or in English is the first Reindeer Husbandry Act or law, and then also together with that law is an agreement in 1978. And this law defines very clear what are the administrative units, how big are the grazing lands. For example, in the law, it was stated that the herding districts are total area 40% of Norway, and also the very clear requirement to join the husbandry. You need to be a Sami people. You need to register to the government, and in that time the law stated that there is a centralized governance by the government by 3 levels of national, regional, the 6 regions I provide, and the local other districts. And at that time there were 80 districts, but now it's around 89 districts due to some merging and separating of the districts. And this about the policy, about economic policy instruments. At that time, the government have the annual financial support for each drift and head. It was called in Norwegian. So it is. So I translate to English. It's about household. So each household will receive from the production subsidy of 50,000 kroner if they keep maximum 600 reindeers. And so this is a subsidy based on the herd size, so that the government purpose was to control that how many reindeers one household or one herders can have. And there were also other economic policy instruments, for example, operating study. There were some subsidies for them. Also compensation for loss from predation, compensation for loss from traffic accidents, and compensation for area loss. But these policy instruments, I will also go much more detailed in the next time zone. But then the result of the first production subsidy, that the number of herders increased, because then the herders were not incentivized to slaughter; they were incentivized to keep the number of herds big enough, and thus the number of reindeers increased. And this because that the herders were incentivized to keep more reindeers, so thus that policy was ineffective. Then we have the second law, and that was the second era, that the reindeer numbers continue to increase up to 300,000 or sometimes over 300,000. And overgrazing continues to happen on the reindeer pasture. Ecological impacts were registered, especially decrease in lichen and biodiversity, and also much more intensification on land use conflicts. For example, building more roads, building more hiking trails, also building more wind turbines, for example, in recent times. And one thing to remember is that the compensations for reindeer loss continue to be paid. But then the government wanted to renew the law. So in 2007, the government renewed the law, and it is the renewed Reindeer Husbandry Act and Agreement. So now the government adopt another administrative unit of SIDA, and SIDA is a Samish word, and the SIDA is group of herders that is in the nearly same household or have a tight relation to each other. And before 1978, the Norwegian husbandry still follows this SIDA practice. So now the government wants to adopt again these administrative units. Thus, we have 4 levels of national, regional, local, and SIDA, and also sub-SIDA. So sub-SIDA is one adult person, and SIDA can be a household of some adult person that also have the reindeer herds and herd together. Then the government increased the policies, and most of them are subsidies due to that the importance of the ecosystem services, the cultural ecosystem services in particular that the reindeer husbandry provide. And so I will go through all of them from district subsidy, production premium. So this is for replacement of the earlier production subsidy because that was ineffective. Calf slaughter subsidy, early slaughter subsidy, special subsidy for SIDA shares in West Finnmark, operating subsidy, spouse and cohabitant supplement, and transport subsidy. So first, I want to talk about the new production premium of the replacement of the production subsidy before. So before that, the government paid the government paid the herders for the number of reindeers, but now the government pay a percentage of additional income from sales of meat, so that the herders are incentivized to slaughter and also are incentivized to keep the herd like more healthier, such that they get better meat quality. So that's for better meat quality, higher income, and thus higher premium. The subsidy is based on sales, not production or slaughter or not production, and this subsidy helps to create a balance between reindeer numbers and slaughter volume. And one disadvantage only is that it might stimulate an increase in reindeer number since meat production is profitable. So in the upcoming next years, then the herders want to have more reindeers because they will slaughter more. And this was in fact true from the data, but it only slightly decreased and then it stabilized a bit more. So this production premium, for me, I group it as that this policy addressed the provisioning and control ES provided by the husbandry, and also addressed the supporting ES provided by the grazing pasture, because then the purpose of the subsidy in overall is to keep the pasture less intact. Also, the next one is the calf slaughter subsidy. So then, if the herders slaughter more calf, then for each calf slaughter in 2007 kroner value, so they will receive additional from 150 krones to 230 krones. So this creates greater profitability due to higher growth and lower mortality of the calf, and it also incentivized because the government wants the herder to keep a smaller herd structure in winter to avoid overgrazing on the winter pasture. So this changed the traditional herd structure. So now calves are around 60 to 80%, and this linked with the conservation and use of ES from husbandry. So only for provisioning and from the grazing pasture are supporting ES. The third one is operating subsidy. So this is a flat subsidy, not a percentage. And this were mentioned because the government wants to decrease the differences in climate and environmental conditions. But it is a flat subsidy for all the subsidies for the partial compensation for operating cost. So actually, it may not capture fully the differences because it's the flat number, but it's still a link to the conservation and use of provisioning and control ES from the husbandry. And the last one are the early slaughter subsidy. So this additional subsidy for those who have not slaughtered their herds in the fall, especially in September. So these are the benefits of this subsidy that is similar to all the advantages of all that has mentioned above, but it did not receive full support from the herders because some herders don't want to slaughter too early. So actually, that for now, that this subsidy is removed. And this also linked to provisioning and control ES from the husbandry and supporting ES from the grazing pasture, because to avoid overgrazing on the winter pasture. Special subsidy for cheetah shares in West Finnmark. So for those who meet the production requirement of 8 kilogram per reindeer in spring herd, and then so they will receive more kroner per kilogram slaughtered. Per kilogram of reindeer is paid, and they also only apply for West Finnmark, and thus is additional income for the herders in West Finnmark, and is incentivized for having reindeer with greater weight and also with better animal welfare, and also with all the advantages of all the policies. But this only in West Finnmark, and some Siddha may not qualify because they did not reach the requirements of 8 kilogram per reindeer. And this links to provisioning and control ES. And spouse and cohabitant subsidy. So if both spouses work, and they also receive something. So this mostly is for increased equality and women's role, and want to keep more people in the husbandry. So it links only with control ES from the husbandry. District subsidy. This is a payment not to the subsidy but to the herding district, same amount, and just in general, just a little bit of additional income to keep a sustainable reindeer herd and slaughter in a profitable perspective, like slaughter more calf and slaughter in the fall. And thus is also similar to all the advantages of all the policies, but this is a bit contradictions with all the subsidies that some Siddha cannot get the subsidy subsidy. But so for now, there's no. But for now, they still have district subsidy, and it's only linked with provisioning ecosystem services. And transport subsidy is just to help. It's based on the kroner per kilometer of transport, because the herder has to to gather all the herds into in the pasture into the slaughterhouse and then to freezing facilities. So this also provides more income and to decrease the cost, and is also linked to provisioning and control ES. Then we have the 3 compensation for loss from predation, from traffic accidents, and for area loss. And especially is that all of them are covering the loss of income, but for the loss from predation is compensating the number of reindeers lost from predation. And it's very hard to know that which type of carnivore or which type of predator that killed the reindeer. So it's very hard to monitor, and usually the herders claim that they lost more reindeers from predation, and but the government because they said that not enough evidence. So usually that the herders do not receive the full compensation if they cannot prove. And this compensation actually it increased more cost to the government. But one special thing is that with the compensation for loss from predation is very linked with the conservation and use of ES from the grazing pasture, because of course, the grazing pasture, we have carnivores in that. And then in this compensation, the government is indirectly trying to say that please sacrifice some of your reindeers for the carnivores, so that there was still the population of carnivores in the wild, and then the government pay for them. So I think that is still linked to conservation and use of the grazing pasture, as it's linked all together. In the tundra biome, then to the current era is from now to 2010 until now is regulation under climate change. So the reindeer numbers after these subsidies and the new production premium, so the numbers have been stabilized of around 220,000, and some policies have been improved. Of course, the subsidies also has been updated to the up-to-date value of grown, and early slaughter subsidy is removed, and compensations for reindeer loss continue to be paid. But thus, due to climate change impacts, for example, rain on snow phenomenon. So you know that in the winter pasture, usually there are a lot of snow, of course, but due to climate change, there is variation in temperature, and thus there is rains on snow, and thus the snow become ice. So this phenomenon is called will lead to ice-locked pastures, and thus the reindeers cannot knock through the ice for the lichen lying under the snow. And thus later that we also have supplementary feeding that the herders have to do. Next one is changes in vegetation community, so also changes in grazing pasture and migrating patterns for reindeer, and also changes in calving patterns. So maybe that the similar can have the calves earlier or later. It also impact on when that the herders will have the calves, and the calves is grows big enough to slaughter. So there is one additional policy was introduced facing impacts from climate change. So this is recently, it is called the District Emergency Fund or Extraordinary Subsidy. So to develop climate change and measures and cover additional expenses, so in total the government pays around 18.5 million in kroner in 2025, and 26 is 23.5 million. And this will help to decrease additional costs and consequences related to climate change, and so help a bit in decrease the cost of, for example, supplementary feeding. But this may not cover all the potential costs, as actually to the data, herders usually requested 20% higher subsidy, and the government try to fit with the budget every year. So this link with provisioning and control ecosystem services provided by the husbandry. And then the special subsidy to young herders. So this was just improved by the subsidy before. So if the leader of the subsidy is very young, less than 30 years old, then they will get annually of 40,000 kroner. And this also helps to incentivize engagement of new generations in husbandry. So this link only with the control ecosystem services provided by the husbandry. So I made some tables that we summarize the subsidies and compensation that have been mentioned. And also the X is whether it is provisioning and ES and control ES. And this table is for reindeer husbandry. And I want to say a bit about conservation or use, because in some instruments, they link with both conservation and use and regulation for use of the reindeer husbandry. But some is only use and some is only conservation. So for example, with district subsidy is ranked as both. And with production premium is also both conservation and use, but for calf slaughter subsidy is only for the use of meat and not really for conservation of the husbandry, of the ES from husbandry. Operating subsidy is both because they decrease the cost. Early slaughter subsidy, like calf slaughter subsidy, so it's only about the use, not conservation. Then special subsidy for cedar shares in West Finnmark is also for both. And from spouse and cohabitant transport, and extraordinary, and special subsidy to young herders, and the three compensations, so they are only about conservation, the ecosystem services provided by the reindeer husbandry, but usually both provisioning and control services. And one thing is that I want to also say about the ecosystem services provided by the grazing pasture. They are indirect services to human, but since that the policies addresses that there is the purpose of the government for better and more sustainable grazing pasture. So there are only 4 that link to conservation of the supporting ES by the grazing pasture, not for use, because I just want to keep them sustainably, or like not too much pressure on the grazing pasture. So it includes production premium, calf slaughter subsidy, early slaughter subsidy, and compensation for loss from predation. And then, so I want to sum up through the three time zones I have separated. We see about the reindeer number, how does it change? So at first, that it increased substantially by the impact of the results, because of the production premium, that was production subsidy that was mentioned before. Then to the second era, when they make the new law, that it's to increase a bit, but slightly, due to they have some incentivized with more reindeers to slaughter more. But in 2010 now, they start to decrease and have been stabilized. For the pasture condition, so for the grazing pasture, at first it was much damaged because there was so many reindeers, and for the next time zones, it was still much damaged due to the scientific articles were found. But then from 2010 now, they're still damaged, but there's a bit less. And for provisioning ecosystem services from husbandry, so at first, of course, always the main focus from all throughout the reindeer husbandry, because it is very important as a way of life for many Sami people in Norway. And for control ES from husbandry, it is not only for Sami people, but also from the country as a whole and for the government. So it was also the main focus. But with the supporting ES from grazing pasture, even though in the first law, the government stated that they wanted to do management of the husbandry and also for sustainable grazing pasture. But actually, the policies are really little focus in this supporting ES from grazing pasture. Then to the next era, I see it as a secondary focus, not still the main focus. And for now, due to climate change and vegetation community change, so that they are secondary and with a little bit more focus. So, in conclusion, the economic policy instruments have been applied for use and conservation of the ecosystem services provided by the husbandry and the grazing pasture. Provisioning and control ES from reindeer herding are mostly focused on based on the table I just showed. More as a secondary focus, some policy addresses the supporting ES of the grazing pasture, but not much. And there are still ongoing debates and discussions between the herders and the government about current issues in management due to climate change impacts and land use conflicts. And thank you. That is the trial lecture that I've made based on the title. I would love to have questions, but I know there's no time.
Thank you, Pham, for presentation. Now we have a break, but for the committee, we will meet and to evaluate if the trial lecture is good. And for audience, I would like to ask you to come back here a few minutes before 12:15, before the committee and the candidate enter the auditorium. Okay. Yeah, see you.
Thank you.
They have the headphone for the opponents. I forgot to put on.
Then this one.
That's
But there's no micro. I
there
don't
should
see
be
any
one
micro.
more here. There, no.
Okay.
Here. Probably here.
Yeah, probably there because this one.
But I don't need it. But the
But the
opponent.
opponent has. Okay. So that's for later. I'm gonna